All right, so this morning we have with us Maggie Dougherty. Hey, Jarrett, good morning. Maggie is an alum of our undergraduate program, and she was a star student, just like you guys. She certainly would have been in the leadership development program if we had had it then. And she has since, well, you've seen her bio, so you know what she's gone on to do. But because she has had such high intensity jobs working in a senator's office, working for the US UN mission, working in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, being at the Capitol for the last craziness of the last few months and the Capitol riot and all of that, I thought she would be a perfect person to address stress management and motivation. I know that when you're a staffer on the Hill, that your job is basically 24 hours a day. So I can imagine she has some really great advice for you guys on how you handle, the intensity of high, high-powered and high responsibility jobs like that. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to hear from her. So please interject at any point to ask questions of her and make comments. I'm sure she'd much rather hear from you than from me. She certainly had her fill over the years of me asking her questions. So, but I'm going to start just by allowing her to sort of talk you through her experience and make any first points about those two subjects that that she's been thinking about as I asked her to come here and talk to you. Go right ahead, Maggie. Oh, actually, first let's do a little round so you get to know everybody who's here. So on my screen, Mia, you're first, then Wes, then Peter, then Katie, and then Jarrett. Ready, go.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Mia. As Dean Halpin probably told you, we're all like juniors, seniors here, so I'm a junior. I'm also majoring in political science and economics, so I'm kind of interested to hear you talk about your time on the Capitol. Other than that, I run our strategic communications team at the Institute, so I kind of handle our social media, and I'm just really excited to hear what you have to say today.
Hi, I'm Wesley. I think we spoke briefly recently on LinkedIn. I'm a senior, and so I'm just at this point getting ready to graduate, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this meeting.
Yeah, good morning. My name's Peter. I'm a junior. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say today. I'm studying diplomacy and philosophy. I'm interested in Eastern Europe, and yeah, thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you for coming to speak with us. My name is Catherine, but I go by Katie, and I am a senior who's minoring in Asian studies because I'm studying the Chinese language, and in the fall I'm going to be going to law school.
Hey, good morning. My name is Jarrett Dang, and I am a diplomacy and economics junior student at the Institute. One of the things I do on campus is run the Diplomatic Envoy, which is the Diplomacy School's newspaper. I'm actually really excited to hear you talk, especially about your experience at USUN, because I was a press intern there in the fall of last year.
Okay, go ahead, Maggie.
Great. Good morning. Well, thank you guys for being chipper on a Friday morning. When I was a diplomacy student, I never took classes on a Friday morning, so I give more power to you. But I was at work. I was at the admissions office doing Blue Crew, so I was up. But it's actually really funny when Dean Halpin asked me to do this, and she was like, yeah, you have a very high-stress job, and I kind of forget that sometimes. But of course, I got reminded because last night I was up until midnight working on amendments for a bill on China that is going through the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So I was like, oh yes, I do have a high stress job, but I've kind of become immune to it. But I'm happy to touch on, things that I've done and things that I've worked on that has definitely helped. So during my time when I first started in the Senate, I worked for Senator Marco Rubio from Florida. And whenever you work in Congress, it's always about the member, right? That's whose name's on the door. There's no really pride and ownership when it comes to drafting legislation, writing op-eds, writing floor speeches. You know, I don't get to say that like I've been published in the New York Times. I have been published in the New York Times, just under the name of my current boss instead. So that's always something that's always, you know, I think for Hill staff, we just get very used to it, that like you're always doing the work, but like people know what you're doing, but you don't always get what other people would view the credit on it. So it's something that I think is very humbling, because you're a public servant, so you're working for a better cause, and that I think is what motivates a lot of folks who work in public policy and on Capitol Hill. Is, you know, it's fun and exciting and fast paced, but we're all working on public policy to help the American people and people around the world, and so that really is what kind of keeps me motivated. One of the things I think working with, and in my job, you know, I've worked with Senator Rubio, who, you know, at the time, well, still as a senator, but then I was working for him when he was running for president. In between Senator Rubio's office and going to the U.S. mission to the UN, I actually worked at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. And when I did that, I worked with the British ambassador at the time. So he was my main principal, but we also had visits from Theresa May when she was prime minister, and Boris Johnson when he was then foreign secretary. So I had high level principal engagement there. And then when I worked for the U.S. mission to the UN, I was on Ambassador Haley's senior team. And so I had daily interactions with her. And now on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I have daily interactions with the then chairman, now ranking member, as well as everyone on the committee. And so now I think I'm very used to it, but it's very important to remember that even when you're working with principals that are very important people, at the end of the day, they're also people. And so you see all the time folks who will like get all nervous, or like, you know, will try to not talk to them like they're human beings. But I found that that's the most important thing is, yes, I call my boss sir and call him senator, and give him respect. But I also tell him, you know, when he says something incorrect, that he said something incorrect, or that I disagree with him on something. Because I think that's really important when you're working with people who are established, you know, high ranking, but they're human beings too. And you need to engage with them like they're human beings in a respectful way, never be rude. But it's, you know, especially depending on the personality, it's fine to tease them, you know, things like that, so they can open up and it's not just all business all of the time. When it comes to work-life balance, for me, I was joking, I'm a morning person. And so that is when I'm most productive. And the Senate is a weird place where most of the time, actual business or meetings don't start till 10 a.m. And so for me, if I want to, you know, get a workout in, you know, do something personal, I do it in the morning, because after 10 a.m., I'm never sure where my day is going to go. And so I just make sure that I'm going to dedicate the time in the morning to get up, go on a run, organize something that I need to do some personal stuff, because then the rest of the day is a little bit crazy. And I think that is one of the things that helps me the most. I try right now, because of our work schedule, I try to go into the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But on Wednesday, I got a phone call and you need to brief the boss. And so at 6 p.m., I had to, you know, throw makeup on, put on real clothes and run into the office so I could brief him. Luckily, I live very close to the office, so it's not a problem. But it is something that, you know, my schedule is really never my own. But I enjoy the work. It's very rewarding. And there are times when things are slow, which is nice. Especially in Congress, when there is recess, you have time to kind of sit back, relax, do more forward thinking, and not be just kind of answering whatever fire drill is going on that day. I think, one of the things that gets people most stressed out is probably email management. Everyone has their own way to do it. My comms director does inbox zero, and I have no idea how she does it. I do read all of my emails, well, most of the time, but like right now I'm checking, I have 24,000 emails in my inbox for work, and that's just how I manage it. I try to divide it, but that's an important thing, I think, that people just can get very stressed about in a fast-paced job. And I used to have a girl who worked for me who would always read her emails from the bottom up instead of the top down. So she would always be responding to emails that have already been responded to. And I was like, we need to work on this. And then I'm trying to think back to my time when I was working in USUN. So I was working in the Washington, D.C. office because Ambassador Haley was a cabinet level official. She had a small team in D.C. And it was very interesting working because it was my first time working in an administration and seeing the State Department and how it works. And the State Department is a huge, big bureaucracy with lots of letters and offices and a whole different lingo. So going into that was crazy. And I probably worked 7 to 7 at least every day, always having my phone, because my job was even more complicated because I was following what was going on at the UN Security Council, which has its own schedule and its own craziness. And then I also was doing Ambassador Haley's congressional outreach. So I was also following Congress's schedule, which is also crazy, and trying to match up those two schedules and trying to communicate what's going on in the Security Council with what's going on at Congress. And then also, what's going on with that National Security Council. And, if they were having interagency meetings and making decisions and kind of like, putting it all together. It was a lot of fun, and I got to work on a lot of really great issues. But it was a lot of work and very, exhausting. People who stay in administrations in high level political jobs for more than 2 years, I'm like, you guys are amazing and have a lot of energy. I think I'll stop there, and if there's things that you think I didn't hit, let me know, and I'm happy to talk about them.
So could you talk a little bit about, so one of the, obviously hitting on the stress of, high level of responsibility and working long hours and things like that is sort of one level of stress management. And then there's also, sort of the heaviness of the content of your job, right? So I know that one of your particular interests when you were a student was human trafficking, and I know you follow those issues. So just using that as an example, the world can be so depressing, and the more you know about it, the harder it is to ignore those, those kind of issues. And so one of the things that we wanted to address as a leadership cohort that we don't feel is necessarily something that's focused on maybe enough in the diplomacy school is how do you manage the emotional toll that, a stressful international relations job can induce because of the heaviness of being in international affairs.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And right now, I still work on trafficking issues. I do human rights, global women's issues worldwide for the committee. So I feel like it's kind of a weird joke that I have with our comms team, but when we do clips every morning, again, I'm a morning person, so when I'm sending in the news clips for the ranking member to read, I'm always the one. Like yesterday, I sent in a New York Times article, or no, sorry, it was a Reuters special report on all of the sexual violence going on in Tigray, in Ethiopia, and it's horrific what is in that article and what these women have experienced. And it's 7:30 in the morning, and I'm emailing it all around to my coworkers, and I'm just like, I'm sorry that I'm sending this to you, but it has to be read, right? And if we ignore these issues just because they're difficult, then that's the problem. And for me, working on these issues, as horrible and bad as they are, I think it definitely always puts my life in perspective when I'm worried about anything. So that's kind of what I take from it is, oh, this horrible bad thing is occurring in Tigray, in Burma, like and then I reflect back on my life and like, oh, I am so blessed and lucky to live in the US, to have all the abilities that I have. And then I also turn it and then say, hey, how can I work on this? How can I make this better in my job, for my position? What can I do to, move the ball forward, if it's in a small way or a big way? So, for example, on Tigray, it's Ethiopian and Eritrean soldiers that are committing these horrible things. So we're exploring options when it comes to U.S. assistance. We don't really give them that assistance, but options when it comes to those soldiers working in peacekeeping operations, or discussions with the Ethiopian ambassador, Eritrean ambassador here in DC. So I try to use the sad stuff that really is what like motivates me. And I try not to let it get me down. But I do know there are times, I think more than anything, it's more been in recent weeks and months, Dean Halpin, you referenced, January 6th. Like, I think that got me down the most because that was so close to home for me. I've worked on Capitol Hill for almost 10 years on and off. And I live on Capitol Hill. And so I am, these are Capitol police officers are people that I'm friends with. I see every day, I talk to every day, and so, and then, the Senate is my second home. I spend a lot of time there. So it could be my first home. And so that I think that probably gets me down more. And then the international stuff, just because I feel bad because I'm so used to it, but it also is something that motivates me, right? Every time I hear the bad stuff, I try to turn it into good stuff because, there is no other option, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about exercise and, reserving time in the morning for yourself. Could you talk about sort of, what kinds of things you do, for self-care when you're working really, really long hours and you're always, meant to be on call. And obviously, you're like using your personal time before the office starts to read the news and make sure that you're up on the latest, current affairs so that you can use it in the office. So how do you, what do you do and how do you sort of arrange, schedule, set aside the time that you need for self-care?
Yeah, I try really hard, especially, being in a job where you do spend a lot of time in the office, pre-COVID. I tried really hard. It's really easy to get in the habit of just eating at the Senate cafeteria or when it's late night, eating out of the vending machines. And so I try to do a really good job of on Saturday or Sunday actually doing meal prep. And so I make my meals that way. I know exactly what I'm eating and it's not an excuse. And this is a more recent habit in the last 2 years. No, when I was a baby staffer, I would eat the Senate special from the grill. That was definitely something with fries every day, which also is not fiscally responsible. I've now learned. So I think for that's really important to me. But sometimes, I'll admit, I'll make something, and then Wednesday, I'm like, I'm over this. I need to get something else. But I do try to do that just from a health standpoint. Other self-care activities. I mean, for me, it's really important to talk to my family. They all live in St. Louis, Missouri still. So I do make time almost every day to talk to my mom and both my sisters. Usually it's in the evenings. But I do make sure to talk to them, because that's the other thing is you can get wrapped up, especially in working the foreign policy world. and only be talking about, like, if I said tea gray to my mother, she'd be like, what are you talking about? So it's good to talk to people that aren't talking about work constantly and aren't following all the things that you're following all the time, and get to hear about, like, oh, my nephew had his first soccer game, you know, and stuff like that, that pulls you out and reminds you, oh, there's all these other things going on. Yeah, so I think it's just, timing wise for me, again, I get stressed enough. I'm a morning person, so that's what I do most of my stuff. I do try to make sure to get to bed at 10. Sometimes I go to bed at 9:30. And it's just because sleep is very, very, very important. I highly recommend this book by Dr. Matthew Walker called Why We Sleep. It just talks about, you can do everything else right in your life. You can eat right, you can exercise, but if you do not sleep the appropriate amount, you do not get the benefits from it. And so that is something that I probably read that book again about 2 years ago. And I was like, all right, I need to be focusing more on my sleep schedule, because that will help me deal with everything else. Other self-care, I mean, I tried, like, it's hard, like, because of COVID, right? It's hard, but I try to, you know, go out and take walks when I can. If I can take phone calls while walking and, you know, going outside, that's another thing. And, you know, luckily living, you know, in Washington, D.C., Virginia and Maryland have a lot of great hikes and things like that. So on the weekend, just going out in the nature, because like I mentioned, I work on the hill and I live on the hill. So it's very easy. I could go weeks without leaving a 4-block radius. And so it is important to break out that time. But like this weekend, for example, I was planning on going on a hike, but now because of what's going on in committee, I'm still waiting for instruction on whether or not I have to be on call. I will be on call, but whether or not I have to actually be on a phone call. And I can't do that when I'm on the top of a mountain. But it's okay. I can always go the next weekend is kind of, you know, how I view that. And I don't, it's kind of just a balance thing.
So when you're always on call, how do you maintain relationships with people outside your family that, you know, aren't required to love you and accept that you may break plans?
So I actually have a really two good friends, and they actually came up with this, and I kind of crashed it because they were posting about it on Instagram. And so it was called Monday Night Supper Club, and it was two women, one who I used to work at the British Embassy with, and one of her friends who is a urban planner. And on Monday nights, they would make dinner and sit and talk about their day. And so they were doing that for a bit. And then I just kept on bugging them. And I was like, this looks great. This looks great. And they're finally like, Maggie, you could join us. So I'm part of the Monday Night Supper Club. Now one of them has a conflict on Monday nights, so it's Tuesday nights, but we try to move it. But even during COVID, we made sure, because we could no longer meet, we would do FaceTime and we would talk about it and talk about our lives and what we're doing. I've had a few, you know, groups of friends who have turned to Zoom calls to try to stay in touch. I also really enjoy, I feel like an old person, I really enjoy writing letters and cards. So I send a lot of cards to friends, mostly around holidays, but it's a good way, old-fashioned way to kind of stay in touch. I have a pretty good group of friends from my time in DC now, and we probably see each other once a month and try to be flexible. One of them is actually an FDA lawyer, so her life is she works every weekend, and so she's the one who's usually canceling plans. But I think people normally understand, like I mentioned, I was up until midnight yesterday. I live in a house with roommates, and it was one of my roommates' birthdays, and I was throwing a birthday party. So I had all our friends over. They were in the backyard, and then I had to come up here, and I was like, sorry, guys, I'm like on the computer. But I think most people understand, as long as you're not like that all of the time, and it's more on a case-by-case basis, that people are pretty understanding.
So, guys, feel free to, ask your questions when you're ready. Well, maybe you could tell a story about a particularly stressful experience that you had in one of your positions, and how, maybe different people react to stress in the office and how you're able to manage that?
Sure. One time particularly pops into mind, and it was when I was working for Ambassador Haley, and we were working with a congressional office who had some questions regarding U.S. funding to a particular UN program. I had worked with the appropriate staff in the State Department to come up with a one-pager, and I never sent that one-pager. I just forgot. Straight up forgot. Human error, too many things going on, too many balls, juggling, and I just forgot. Well, this particular member of Congress was not happy, but did not reach out, her nor her staff, despite numerous conversations. But I said I was going to send them a one-pager, and then I didn't. Did not follow up. But then, my luck, Ambassador Haley appeared before a committee that this member of Congress was on. And that member of Congress said, your staff lied to me and said that they were going to send a one-pager, and they did not. And I'm sitting there just like beet red, like and I'm sitting behind Ambassador Haley at the time. And I'm just like, don't know what to do. And so she was just like, she apologized, was like, we'll fix it, And then afterwards, at this point in time, I hadn't realized that I hadn't sent it. Again, there's so many things going on. I didn't realize it, that I went through all my emails and I was like, I have a draft email open. I never hit send. And at that point in time, our chief of staff was like, Maggie, do not worry. Like, it is a mistake. You are a human. Like, yes, it got blown up. It's on video somewhere. I'm sure I could find it if I wanted to like cringe a lot more about it. And this member of Congress was never going to like Ambassador Haley, so it really didn't matter that much. But it was just for me, like for personally, like I don't normally I don't even know if it's a mess up. Yeah, I screwed up, but it's okay, And it really helped that the person who was our chief of staff at the time was like, Maggie, like it happens. You're human. And he was like, I'll take the blame. That's the other thing that in most of my jobs, I have a lot of responsibility, but the people above me trust me. And so if something bad does happen, they'll take the blame. They'll say, like Maggie didn't do it. I'll take the blame, which is very nice. And I'll do the same thing. Right now I'm only managing one person and then working with staff assistants and interns. But, if something happens and I give the person who works for me a project and, I trust her. So I'm not going to double check every single fact, nor do I have the time to. And then something turns out to be wrong, I'll take the blame, right? Because ultimately it was my responsibility to make sure it was done right. But I think it's always to remember, like, we're all human. We all make mistakes and none of it's the end of the world. Am I going to get fired because I forgot to hit send on one email? No. So it is okay, and you're allowed to make mistakes. The most important thing is to learn from them, right? And I, after that, did a better job of keeping track of my congressional engagement and my emails and making sure at the end of the day, if I was trying to run out of there and it's had a bunch of Outlook things open, make sure none of those were draft emails that needed to go out. So it was a hard lesson learned. It was a lot of stress, especially because it was in such a public setting and it was directly to my boss. But, it all turned out okay. I'm still here today. I didn't lose my job.
Did you have to talk directly to Ambassador Haley about it? How did you confront her about it?
Actually, my chief of staff did it for me. So I did not have to talk to her.
So how do you build that? What would you say are the keys to building that trust with the people that you work with, that, you have that kind of relationship, that your chief of staff would, go to bat for you and you would do the same for your employees and things like that?
I think it takes some practice, right? At this point in time, it'd probably been a year and a half working there. And I think for me, like with my employee, we meet on Mondays and go through the week schedule and go through everything that she's going to do, that I'm going to do, how we're going to split things up when things are due. And so I think for me, that has always been a rhythm that has really helped to ensure when things do get off track, like we had a touch base now, like, and most of the time when Mondays, about 70% of the stuff got done, 30% had fallen away because of other things. But it's a good way to make sure we're on track and we're having that communication, because I think that's the most important. And I think I've always been in jobs where people don't like to micromanage, which I enjoy. You know, people all have different ways of working in battle rhythms, but when it comes to you are given a responsibility and there's a deadline, and if there is a certain format for it or whatever, like make it happen. But I, kind of let people figure it out on their own, because it's easier for them to develop their own systems than for me to force my systems upon them. And so then I'm just very trusting that you will get it done at that certain time. And once you meet that, a few times, then I'm not worried about it in the future, that you understand what your responsibilities are. And I think with my chief of staff, he was a former whole staffer as well, understands, that things get crazy and things get busy and we all make mistakes. And so I think for him, he was honestly like, you didn't hit send on an email. It's not like you did something malicious. It's not like, we're purposely withholding information. Like it was a human error. So he was just very, very understanding about it. And he had known Ambassador Haley for much longer than I have as well. So I think he also was like, you don't need to have this tough conversation with her, because, I can tell her and she will understand, coming from me, exactly what happened.
So you mentioned that, you said in this example that this, senator was never going to like Ambassador Haley. So you've worked for some pretty, beloved and also pretty hated people over the years. How do you, like you said, your work is what they're sharing, right? Mm-hmm. And that's being criticized online and, commented on in the media and things like that. So how do you handle sort of all the negativity around the issues that you're taking a stand on? Yeah. And then, Peter, please ask your question when Maggie answers that. Thank you.
Yeah, for me, I feel like I kind of, for good or bad, I have like blinders, right? I work on my issues. I do not pay that much time to domestic stuff. I simply don't have the time, and it's, easier for me to just focus on my issues. And no matter who my principal is, excuse me, moving the ball forward on those issues and getting them in a good direction. And so, part of what I view as like my skill set is, I joke, but is like getting important people to do what I want them to do, and like to do good policy. And like, that's my job. I'm an advisor. I'm a policy person. I convince people to do stuff that I think is like good for humanity in like a weird way. But when there are those other things that come out there, like your boss did this, your boss did that, all of that noise, that is all for me like politics. And I actually hate politics, which is funny to say. I am a policy person, but you cannot, as I've learned, you cannot do policy without politics, right? There, especially at a level, at a very high level. You could do it at a lower level, but at a very high level, there's always politics. And so when it comes to foreign policy, I would say there are less politics than when it comes to domestic policy. And that's another reason, again, why I enjoy my job, and also why I enjoy the Senate versus the House. The Senate, unless the filibuster goes away, is bipartisan at all times. Yes, it's frustrating and it's annoying and you have to compromise, but I would never introduce a bill, or, my boss work on a bill that didn't have a Democrat on it, because it wouldn't pass. If I introduce a bill with only Republicans, it's not going to go anywhere. Like, it's literally it's a messaging bill. That's what we call it, messaging bills. But if I want to do policy, I have to work with the other side of the aisle, and I have to compromise, and I have to get to good. And so that's why for all the rest of that is noise. There's a lot of stuff out there, and it's just like, it's the joke, like, never read the comments section. Like, no, don't read the comment section. Don't read Twitter all the time. People can post things anonymously, which is like great, yay, free speech, but it also makes people horrible. And like they say things that they don't want to put their name to for a reason. So it's something that I try to ignore. And again, I put blinders and I focus in on what I'm working on and how I can influence and how I can make it better. And then everything else is just a lot of noise. But there is times, that it gets really loud and it does interfere. Like, I won't say who, but there's a certain senator on my committee who I know other offices won't work with because of things that this person does. And so it's, it's difficult for them. Luckily, it's not my boss. My boss is so nice and is very nice to all the other senators, so does not have any issues, but it does happen. And then it makes it difficult for you to do your job if it gets too bad.
Yeah, so I have a quick question, if that's okay. So first of all, thank you so much for being here. I've already learned a lot, and I think your kind of experience is so hard to teach and to learn about. So thank you again for being here. So my question is about sort of your perspective coming from the Midwest. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. I'm also a huge Cardinals fan, so go Cards. But I wanted to ask what you thought about that transition over to the East Coast and sort of the pace of DC and the Hill, and how hard that was to kind of get into at the beginning, and if there's any kind of lessons you have being from the Midwest that have helped you along the way, if that's all right.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. My dad always tells me I deserted them, which I'm like, that is not true, Father. I will say it is funny. So I'm from the suburbs of St. Louis, and Dean Halpin, I don't know if I've ever told you the story, but when I was interviewing for, I don't remember, the Truman, the Marshall, I was working with the Arts and Sciences School on these scholarships post-graduation, and they told me, it was a Truman Scholarship because it was for people from Missouri. Like, I was going to be interviewing with fellow Missourians, and they were like, oh, you talk too fast. You've been on the East Coast too long. And I was like, I've always spoken this quickly. Do not think that people from the Midwest don't speak quickly. So it was actually a very funny culture experience. There's also, don't wear pinstripes because they're gonna make you think that you're like a New Yorker. And I was just like, you guys have your own different views of what. I'm like, pinstripes are like what most suits are made in. I can't help it. I mean, I do think there are things that are a benefit from being from the Midwest. I would say pace-wise, it's funny. It took me a while to realize, on the East Coast, people work 9 to 5 or 10 to 6. But my mom growing up worked 8 to 4. So it was interesting just the time. Maybe that's why I'm a morning person. Another thing is, talking to strangers all of the time. I mean, I was talking about the Capitol Police officers. Every day when I walk in, I talk to the Capitol Police officers, and every day when I leave, I say thank you. I talk to the cleaning folks. I talk to the folks who are checking me out at the register and ask them how's the weather and things like that. So I think there are definite Midwestern qualities, not that that you kind of bring to the table. I think DC is just as a city, and similar to New York, is very career driven. And so, the joke in DC is people always ask you, what's your job? Is the first question is what's your name? Second question is what's your job? And I think that is something that is a little different and takes time to getting used to, that people's jobs are larger parts of their identity maybe than they are in, other parts of the United States. And so, I mean, I think the biggest thing I always laugh at is that no offense, again, anyone from the East Coast, have really bad geography of the United States, horrible geography. And so it's always fun. I'm always like, you guys need to go see the rest of the United States and see, what's going on there to kind of get a better feel is always something I recommend. But DC, so many people move here from other parts of the United States. I didn't realize until I was here for a few years, that how many people from the South actually moved to DC. There's a lot of people from Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. Like that's like, you know, in New York is like the place where, well, a lot of people move to, but a lot of people from Connecticut, New Jersey, you know, they all moved to New York, but I didn't realize it was like a Southern move up to DC until I've been here for a bit.
Who else is ready with a question for Maggie? Go ahead, Mia.
Hi, I just want to thank you again for joining us. You mentioned it a little bit in your last question, this idea of like identity and how in DC, like it's a little bit more tied to your job. So how do you, when you're like working for someone who is kind of like all your work is being attributed to them, like keep your own sense of identity when you're doing this work?
I think because of the way Congress is, people do realize that the staff do all of the work. And also when you're doing the work, you're interacting with, with other people. So I work a lot with NGOs, think tanks, dissidents, embassies. And so, for example, we put out a tweet about the Organization for Prohibition on Chemical Weapons and Russian and Syrian misbehavior, not allowing, you know, for resolutions condemning Syria's use of chemical weapons out on like Monday of this week. And then on Tuesday, I get an email from a think tank saying, hey, I saw your boss's tweet on this, knowing fully well that I'm the one who did it. And we're like, hey, do you want to do a letter? And so I think in the DC mechanism of things, people know like what you've done and what you do because they know that you work for your boss and they acknowledge it. I mean, you know, that's I joke about the New York Times thing, but it's like, you know, if Maggie Dougherty had written an op-ed about, you know, again, Russian and Chinese bad behavior on the Security Council and submitted to the New York Times, but if it gotten printed, probably not. But the fact that it said James Risch on it, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, that's why I got it printed. You know what I mean? So it cuts both ways. But for me, I view it as a benefit, right? My ideas and views got to be presented in the New York Times, even though it wasn't under my name, but it was only there because of his name. So, you know, it kind of cuts both ways. But I think, you know, you have to be proud of your work. And like for me, like I shared that article everywhere because I was so proud of it, even though it didn't have my name on it.
Following on that, could you talk a little bit? You mentioned, you know, it's important for you to be able to disagree with your boss and to share your views and to try to guide them toward the policy opinions that you think are appropriate and going to do, you know, the best work for humanity, as you said. Can you talk a little bit about how you learn to do that? Like how you hone that skill when you're a young staffer and, you know, you're just coming out of school yourself?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing is to have, you know, facts and analysis on hand. I think, you know, when I was younger, I probably went with my gut more than I should. But I think, you know, for example, just this week, I got an argument. Well, I didn't argument. He said something and I was like, no, that's not true. And so, but I then had a fact to back it up. And so the other thing to always remember though is, like I said, his name's on the door is always the joke we say. So like that's the other thing that you have to get used to is when they say no and they mean no, to walk away. And so you could have worked on something, a bill, a resolution, a statement, an op-ed for weeks, months, and then something happens, it might not specifically be your boss and just be like something, you know, big happened that day and then we missed the time window. You have to be able to be like, okay, yes, I spent a lot of time, effort, blood, sweat, and tears. Now it's gone, but like that's the nature of the game. So yes, you should be proud and, you know, of your work and, you know, put a lot into it, but then also realize that like It might not always happen. And if it doesn't, it's not the end of the world. Who knows? Like you might have, I worked on, this is a long time, this is during the Ebola crisis. I learned so in West Africa. I learned so much about Ebola because we were working on an Ebola bill and then we never introduced it. But I can tell you everything about Ebola and travel restrictions, more than you can even imagine. But maybe someday that will come in handy, all of that knowledge. But it's kind of a nature of the game because it is fast paced. And for me, like I've always been functional. So it's always I do a lot of general stuff and it's a big portfolio. And so you never know like what the topic du jour is going to be. And all of a sudden it's going to be like, hey, we want to talk about very specific thing, the Geneva Conventions. And then like I have to go read the Geneva Conventions, do analysis, do stuff and like figure it out. And then like 2 days later, like, oh, the topic du jour is this. And I kind of just jump in. So you always have to, learn something quickly, figure it out, try to move it forward. And then if it doesn't move forward, there's always next time.
Do you have any tips on making that, pivot, those transitions when, something that you've worked on doesn't work out the way you wanted, like how you, let go? Do you do anything in particular to help you in those moments?
Sometimes just throwing it away. Like, here's all of the work I've done, and just dropping it and be like, okay, now my desk is clean. Also, another option, though, in the Senate is I could give it to another office, right? I have the luxury of being a committee member or committee staffer, so I have more time, or not more time, but I have 20 colleagues that cover a portfolio that some staffers cover themselves. So I can also turn and be like, hey, I worked really hard on this. My boss doesn't want to do it. Do you want to do it? So there is an opportunity to also benefit if you do really enjoy the idea or like it and think, it's the best thing is to get someone else to do it. And I mean, I, of course, asked my staff director before I gave away all of my intellectual property, but, and he'd probably just be like, yeah, sure, take it.
And so I'm sure that a lot of that has to do, being able to do that, to share work that you've done with, others, are working on the same issues and things like that. Like, I'm sure a lot of your work is in relationship building. And you mentioned, that NGOs will, come after you after a tweet and say, hey, can we work together on this, et cetera. So what are your tips for, relationship building and getting sort of knowing who can be helpful to you?
Yeah. I think, basic email to people, like that's one of the things that, I've always been taught, and it varies by Senate office, if they take all meetings. And I've always told when I worked in Ruby's office, if anyone asks for a meeting, you take it. And so it doesn't matter if it's a 30-minute meeting, an hour meeting. So, we would meet with everyone because it would also become a story. Like Rubio's office won't meet with these people, blah, blah, blah. So like barring like terrorist organizations, right? We're talking like most people we will meet with. And so always meeting with people. And then when they send you an email, like, even if it's just like, thanks, we'll look into it, or thanks for the, you know what I mean? Like actually acknowledging it. Because a lot of these groups do send blast emails, but some of them don't. And they send you something and yeah, you might not be able to meet next week. You might not be able to work on that idea for a few months, but just acknowledging it, I think is helpful. One thing I do like personally is for my boss, and again, I got this clear through our comms team. Every Friday, I do a summary of all of the statements and all of the tweets that the ranking member has done on human rights, international organizations, democracy, my whole field. And I send that to all of my NGO contacts and some of the offices that work on the issues. And so I do that, like, today's Friday, so hopefully I'll do it around 3. I figured out that's like the best time, and it's not a ton of information. I also make all of them links so people can click on them easily if they want to see more. And I get emails from NGOs, and I actually used to do this when I worked for Ambassador Haley with her stuff on Fridays and a look ahead the next week. but it's just making information easy for people to see, and then they know, and they're like, oh, I missed that on Tuesday because Lord knows what else was happening, but they actually put a statement out about Somalia and what's going on there. Like, we'll talk to them. So I think, knowing your audience, targeting them, and also just responding to their messages. I WhatsApp with like people in Syria, people in Burma, all of the time, and just kind of, can we be active on these issues all the time? No, but even if I'm just checking in saying, hey, what's the status of this? How's this going on? They enjoy it, even if it's not coming from the senator.
Thanks. All right, we've got less than 10 minutes, guys, so get your questions in. Go ahead, Katie.
Okay, so I am curious on how, how you narrow down your interest in foreign policy with wanting to specifically, be an advisor, be a policy person, helping the actual figures, and narrow down who you wanted to work for, and also knew when to take the next step and look for the next thing during your career.
Yeah, so I started focused pretty exclusively on human trafficking when I was at Seton Hall. And so I actually originally was interested in international education. So when I was at the diplomacy school, it was the Millennium Development Goals, which are now over. We're now on the SDGs, but goal number 2 was universal education, universal childhood education. And so I originally thought I was really interested in that. I actually did an internship that Seton Hall helped me get with an NGO, Global Nomads Group in New York. And they facilitated video conferences between kids in the US and kids overseas. And during that time period, I actually learned a lot about human trafficking. And so then I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And so then that's kind of when I switched a little bit. And then when I graduated, I was looking for a job. And when I got hired in Senator Rubio's office, they were like, the senator really enjoys your background in human trafficking, but you have to do all of foreign policy. As a junior staffer, there was a senior staffer who I worked with. And so I had a very broad portfolio. Like, I was working on the Iran deal and like Venezuela and like a lot of things, but I did get to, especially because I was very lucky that Senator Rubio really cared about human rights and human trafficking issues, I did get to specialize in that I enjoyed it. And so I can't, it's a little, I don't want to say the bad with the good, but I took on a broader portfolio, but I did get to focus on what I wanted to focus on, which was nice. And it made me realize how much I did enjoy working on those issues, and not that I don't enjoy working on these other issues, but it helped me discern that. And then when I was like I mentioned, like, I'm a policy person, not a politics person. So I did enjoy the policy aspects of it. And then when I was, the reason why I left Senator Rubio's office was because he announced he was no longer running for Senate. So I was going to be out of a job. So it was really not an option at the time. So I took the job at the British Embassy, and that job was not as policy focused because I was a congressional advisor. So I was more, it took some like meeting the British government's interests with the US government's interests, but was a lot more of, hey, this senator cares about Brexit, let's set up a meeting type of stuff. I myself was not making the policy. London was making the policy. And so I did that job for about 8 months. And during that time, I realized I do not want to be a congressional advisor. So it was a good opportunity for me. And then I thought I would be in that job about 2 years. And then Ambassador Haley's team approached me about joining her team. And at that point in time, I had worked on UN stuff, but I, mostly from an oversight standpoint when I was in the Senate, I wasn't as familiar, like in the weeds of the UN. But then I took the job and I learned so much in those 2 years. And then now that was one of the reasons why my job now, I do oversight of international organizations, including the UN. So without that Ambassador Haley's experience, I probably could have gotten this job, but it's way more helpful. And I have the context, know the people, and able to do it. I still have a very broad like portfolio. But I think for me, it's trying new things. Like, did I know, that I would enjoy working on UN issues? Like, I knew there were parts of it, right? I'd like to work on human rights issues and things like that. But it was good to like learn the actual system, how it works, how it doesn't work. All of that was really great.
Okay, last question. While you guys are thinking about it, Maggie, you said that the US UN mission approached you. Was that because your reputation was so good? Was it because you'd worked with someone in the office who knew your work? How did they know of you to approach you for this position?
Ambassador Haley and Senator Rubio are friends. And so when they were looking for someone, Senator Rubio recommended me. So it was very, very lucky. So along those lines. But yeah, so even though I had left his office, he did continue to be a senator, win re-election. I also left on very good terms. And I still see him now because he's one of the members on my committee. So it's pretty funny. Sometimes he accidentally looks at me and I'm like, your advisor's that way. I can still advise you, but you probably want to talk to your staff.
Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, thank you so much again for taking the time out of your day to meet with us. But as kind of a closing question, I guess, are there any resources or kind of books, podcasts, anything like that you think are the most, like, that have helped you the most or that you kind of follow up with each week, anything like that you could recommend to us?
So I have a pretty, again, I'm going to keep coming back to I'm a morning person. So every morning, I listen to NPR's Up First. For me, it's kind of I do a gauge of like what international news actually gets paid attention to, because it is a broad news broadcast. I also listen to the New York Times, The Daily, every day. They do domestic and international. So again, it's a good deep dive on different issues. And then I also listen to the NPR Politics podcast as well. They come out in the afternoon usually, but I usually listen to them in the morning. For my job, when I do the clips in the morning, I do look at the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and then Reuters, just the top world news clips. And kind of just see if there's anything that is in my portfolio. Trying to think. Good books that I've read lately. I actually just read Daughters of Kobani by Gail. I can't pronounce her middle name, but her last name's Lemon, or her maiden name. But it's about the Kurdish YPG in the fight against ISIS, and basically how they led the fight against ISIS at the end, and all of the work that they've done. And it's very interesting. It just came out in February. It is very good. I do try to read. I have not been a big fiction person in the last like 5 or 6 years, but now I'm trying to do like a nonfiction and then a fiction to kind of break it up a little more. Another good one that I recommend to everyone is Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. It's about the gender data bias and how most things that are designed in the world are made for men and not women. And so it's really interesting, from crash car dummies to PPE to cell phones to transit systems. And we're seeing a lot of that play out right now in with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So it's really interesting. But yeah, so those are some of the things that I do in my spare time in the morning.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. I don't know if you could see the chat, but both Wesley and Jarrett had to run to a 10 a.m. class. So that's the only reason why they cut out early. So I just wanted you to know that they wrote in the chat that they were really grateful for you coming to speak with us. So I know you have a hard stop now, and our class is over. So I don't want to keep you, but thank you so much for such a great talk today. You were really candid. We appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to hear from you, Maggie, and we're really so proud of the work that you do as a school. And if you're okay with it, if the students want to follow up with you on any questions they have, as they're putting their final project together, I'd be happy to pass your information along, whatever you're comfortable with. So just let me know if that's okay.
That is great. Yeah, no, I'm happy. Pass along my information. Any questions? Happy to answer.
Great. Well, thanks again, Maggie. It was great to see you.
Thanks. Have a good Friday.
Yeah, happy weekend.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What did you guys think?
It was good. It was nice to have like a different perspective, I guess, because we usually do focus more on like people who are working abroad, whereas like someone who is working domestically but on foreign issues.
Cool.
I really liked it. I think like kind of more and more her kind of job is really appealing to me. So I think like to hear about that sort of perspective is awesome. So yeah.
Good. Definitely connect with her on LinkedIn and follow up if you're interested in that kind of career. And she literally is a bad word. She does not literally know everyone, but she knows everyone in DC, and she is very well liked. And everyone that I've ever spoken to about Maggie, I'll say like, oh yeah, Maggie, you must know Maggie Dougherty. She's an alum of our program. And they're like, oh, we know, she doesn't shut up about Seton Hall. So she's a great person to know. And she is on our Diplomacy Alumni Association board as well. So, all right, guys. So next week we'll have our run through, our rehearsal. So let me know if you need anything in between to help make that smooth. All right. Bye.
Thank you
Have
so
a great
much.
weekend.
Have a good one, guys.